This week, Critiquing Comics favorite Kristin Tipping talks about the background to Evil Witch Allie and A Book for Sad Pets. Why did her art style change on Evil Witch Allie, and why did Volume 2 seem more confident than Volume 1? Why is the tone of A Book for Sad Pets so desperate? Plus her experience in going to school to make comics and more. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. I'm talking to Kristin Tipping in the Twin Cities, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in Minnesota. How are you doing?
It's cold. I don't know if you heard, but Minnesota is cold.
It does tend to get cold there. I mean, it's only October as we're recording this. How cold is it?
It's been snowing.
Oh, wow.
Several days. Yeah. It's not even Halloween yet. I'm so mad.
Yikes. Okay. Well, then probably in December and January it'll be 80 degrees. But
yeah. Hopefully, or not hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah, so, of course, we've talked about your comics several times on Critiquing Comics. And then also I met you that one time when I was there and you were on the show briefly then.
New Comic Book Day.
Right, yeah. The event at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, well, let's see. So, Evil Witch Allie, let's start there, since that's where what listeners would know most about you, I think, is Evil Witch Allie, because they've heard about it on our show a couple times. Well, the question that keeps coming up, Mulele keeps raising it, is Evil Witch Allie really evil? Because she doesn't seem evil.
So that's a mystery that will be explored further in the comic as it goes. Okay. The name is sort of a joke, but also sort of not, and that's all I'll say about it.
Okay. So we recently talked about the Volume 2 of Evil Witch Allie, and I think we both felt, certainly I felt, that it was improvement over. I mean, Volume 1 was good, but we felt like kind of the art and the writing both had improved or matured or something. Did you change your art process?
Well, I was gonna say no, but I actually did, but it didn't happen until about 50% of the way through the book.
Oh.
I switched from making everything in Photoshop to making everything in Clip Studio Paint.
Okay.
So I rely a lot more heavily on 3D character models now.
What do you mean by that?
So in Clip Studio Paint, it's like a 2D drawing program, but it has a function where you can put. It's hard to describe without any visuals, but you can put 3D models of objects or people in the program and pose them and change the proportions and things. And so I'll use that to block out scenes and stuff. And then just draw over the top of because the 3D models are just these gray mannequin things. Mm-hmm. And I think you can do more complicated stuff, but I am not smart enough to do that. So I'll just take these mannequins and change their proportions to match what I want, and then like pose them in whatever way I want. And it's interesting. I think I'm getting better at it. It's cool because it makes it a lot easier to like find interesting camera angles and like not worry about me being able to like draw the perspective right. I can just sort of do it, and I can also sort of test out different angles and get a better idea of how they look before I actually start drawing. But it also can end up, and I feel like I ran into this a little bit when I switched over, is that it can look kind of stiff and like the characters are dolls almost that you pose, because they kind of are. But I feel like I've gotten slowly better at like incorporating it in a more natural looking way.
Okay. So yeah, Clip Studio Paint, I know the name. I don't think I've ever seen it being used.
It used to be called Manga Studio.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so they had a sale on it, and I wanted to try it for a long time. And I also realized that Photoshop only like does subscription now.
Yes.
Eventually, when I would be forced to update to Photoshop in the future, I didn't want to deal with that because I got Photoshop like right before they switched over to the subscription model. So I just have it, and I'll have it forever, which is nice. But eventually, it's going to become, the version I have is going to become outmoded. So I started using Clip Studio Paint, and I hated it and myself for like a week, because I was like, if I keep using Photoshop for like the main thing I'm doing, which was Evil Witch Allie, then I'm just gonna keep using Photoshop for everything. So I'm like, I'm going to force myself to learn this new program by making my main comic that updates regularly in this new program. And it was super frustrating at first, but it actually did work. So now I like primarily use Clip Studio Paint, and I'll only occasionally use Photoshop for things that I can't do in Clip Studio Paint.
Okay. But it sounds like Clip Studio Paint has a lot of features that Photoshop doesn't have. Like you were talking about these kind of models.
Clip Studio is so Clip Studio, unlike Photoshop, is actually made for comics.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of it is more friendly to artists or like people who draw or paint, as opposed to photo editing, which is what Photoshop is actually made for. It's also got some like really weird, annoying things about it, though, including some things that don't really make sense for a program that was made for making comics. For example, there is no spell check.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not that I've been able to find. Like you could have a bajillion spelling errors and it wouldn't care. Which is bad for me because I'm dyslexic. But I'm like managing to muddle through anyway. Okay,
well, I don't recall noticing many or any spelling errors, but
they pop up occasionally. Generally, what I've ended up doing is using my webcomic readers as my copy editors. So like
it's a way of getting reader engagement, right?
Yeah.
Check my spelling errors.
And someone will be like, "You spelled this wrong," and I'll be like, "Okay," and then I'll fix it that same day, and then never speak of it again. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you're sure to hear about those things if there are spelling errors there. Okay, well, yeah, so Volume 1 was all in Photoshop, so what were you using? Are you using like a Cintiq or something, or?
So I was, so until very recently, for like years and years, I was using the same, really cheap bamboo tablet. So it's one of the ones that you plug into your computer and then you draw on the surface, and like it will, the art will like appear on your computer screen.
Right, there's no screen on the tablet. It's just I had one of those, and I tried to use it for Spider Hag briefly, and I thought I can't do this, and I kept using paper.
Yeah, I think it's because I started doing it in high school, that I was able to learn to use that sort of tablet fairly comfortably, and then just got used to it. This year, I actually bought, and so I started using Clip Studio on my desktop, and then I found out there's a Clip Studio app because one of my friends had gotten it and was started drawing all of her comics on an iPad, and I like tried like drawing on her iPad and was like, oh my god, this is amazing. So then I ended up like buying an older generation iPad off Amazon and an Apple Pencil, and now I've been for like the very tail end of Volume 2 was all drawn on the iPad pretty much.
I see. Okay. Because it seemed like, I mean, if I'm comparing some pages here, the newer ones, somehow the art feels a little kind of cleaner, like the inside the lines there's more just like white space.
Volume 1 is interesting because it was incredibly rushed. Because originally the Volume 1 was supposed to be my thesis project for grad school, and I ended up only getting about halfway through it before I graduated. But I made a lot of decisions on the fly that I then had to stick to, and some of them were good and some of them were not. And one of the decisions I made was to have this super messy art style that in a lot of ways I do kind of, there's like overall I feel like it looks pretty janky, but there are definitely like moments where it kind of worked and it just looked really moody and like really, I feel like nailed the atmosphere. And so going into Volume 2, I was basically like, I'm not dealing with all of these arbitrary restrictions I gave myself for Volume 1. Like I decided that I wanted to do like I wanted to change it and have everything be very clean during the when like normal life is happening, and then sort of bring the like more painterly, messy style back in when supernatural things happen. So all of the ghosts are like rendered in this super like messy, not quite in the lines sort of style, and then all of the humans and like the environments for the most part are like very clean lines, and they get like sucked into the book, or yeah. And then so it sort of shifts in that way. I feel like it was interesting because I feel like the first volume, like I feel like I gave myself a lot of limitations. And then the second volume, I didn't do that like at all. And you can sort of see where, and it helped in some ways, but there's also in some ways it's like not as consistent. I feel like the art style is not as sort of consistent in the second volume, because there were some points where I just decided, yeah, I'm going to start using gradients, and then I'll never use them again after this scene. Yeah, so stuff like that. And also I'm very glad that I was able to get an editor for Volume 3, because Volume 1 is like under 100 pages. It's pretty short. And then Volume 2, it sort of dawned on me while I was working on Volume 2, like I kind of need an editor. And
so how did you go about finding an editor then?
So the editor that I found, I actually found her on Twitter. I should give you her name, but I don't believe I've ever heard it spoken out loud.
So you're not sure how to say it?
Yeah. But yeah, so I applied for this grant, the Minnesota, it's the Artist Initiative Grant.
Okay.
And it's like state funded grant for like Minnesota artists. And they want you to, I actually like knew, I was actually like sort of budgeting and planning for this like way ahead of time, because when you apply for the grant, they want you to lay out a budget of everything you're going to do with the money. And they want to have they want you to have like really specific plans. So I actually like contacted like a few different potential editors, and talked to them and like asked for quotes, so I knew kind of how much to earmark in my budget for an editor. And then so I was able to, so when I then submitted my grant proposal, I was able to say I'm going to use, one of the things I'm going to use the money for is to hire an editor, and it's going to cost this much, and it's going to be this editor who has worked on these things and has already agreed to edit the comic should I receive the grant. And like put all of that in the proposal, and then I got the grant, so I guess it paid off.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Malele wanted me to ask you, let's see, was there any difference between what the original idea for Evil Witch Allie was and what it has become?
So there's the original first volume, like I didn't even know if I was going to continue it after that. I wanted to make something that I could potentially continue, but that could also work as a standalone. So I ended up sort of figuring out where it was going sort of as I wrote volume 2, and sort of figured out, I have like the ending in sort of broad strokes figured out. But I'm kind of realizing as I go, because like there was a point. So I sort of thought like when I was decided to continue with the story, I originally was like, okay, I'm going to figure out like the entire thing now, basically, and then I'll know exactly how it ends, and I'll just write towards that. And I found out that that doesn't really work. And like I've sort of started to, because that's sort of how I write shorter stories, which most of what I've written is shorter. Is I'll like figure out where I'm going, and then I'll have an ending, and then I'll just like connect the beginning and the ending, basically.
Okay.
But I'm now realizing that like it gets a lot more complicated the more long form.
Right. If it's a 10-page story, that's not so hard. But yeah, if it's hundreds.
And I'm sort of realizing now that like there's this like old like writing saying of like character is king. And there's like I actually made a major change to the end of volume 3 after getting it back from my editor, because I realized that like this thing that I knew was gonna happen eventually, but I was trying to put off until the end of the series so that I wouldn't really have to deal with the consequences of it. Is like that, the logical thing to happen is for it to actually happen at the end of this volume. Like that's the thing that makes sense from a character perspective.
Okay.
And so now I have like this massive change kind of at the end of volume 3. And then I'm just going to have to deal with the repercussions of that as I go. And I'm sort of learning to let go of like that fear of like, but what about, but like, yeah, like I just have to like have to keep making problems for myself and then solving them. I've realized.
I see.
Yeah.
But yeah, the tone of volume 2, I don't know, just it was kind of hard to put my finger on, but it felt more mature. Mulele pointed out it kind of felt more confident. Did you feel like more confident of where you were going in volume 2 compared to volume 1, or was it just because you had more time to work on it?
I think a lot of it was time, because I noticed one thing I've noticed that wasn't intentional, and I'm actually kind of mildly worried about from a consistency perspective, I guess, is that the narration has kind of disappeared as the comic has gone on. So there's a ton of narration in the first comic, and there's a little bit in the second comic, mostly in the beginning, and there's like pretty much none in the script for volume 3 at the moment. And I think that's because I was basically using the narration to info dump, essentially, when I didn't have time to draw a bunch of stuff. Tell the audience in a more naturalistic way what was going on. And so I think that part of that, I think that the volume 2 sort of feels a little more possibly like nuanced because of that. And like the audience kind of has more opportunity to watch the characters and kind of interpret what they're doing and what they must be like feeling emotionally from that, and sort of intuit what's going on rather than being told. And so I think it sort of feels a little more subtle and a little more lived in for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it feels a little more like there's sort of a message to it, or something emotionally is going on with the characters. There's more depth to it, I think, compared to the first volume.
Yeah, well, I think the first volume was very emotional as well, but I think the second volume kind of dwells on that more. There's more build-up, as opposed to the first volume where it was very much an exercise in like just being ruthless. For me, like, where I was like, okay, everything has to move the plot. We cannot. And I still sort of feel that way. Like I feel like there shouldn't be pages where you're not. Like, I feel like every page should contribute to the story in some fashion, and that doesn't necessarily have to be moving the plot forward. But yeah, I was like trying to be like very ruthless about like editing, and I think I over edited in the first volume a little bit, and I probably under edited a little bit in the second volume. And so the first volume sort of ended up, I think, feeling a little bit rushed in places. But I still look on it with a lot of affection. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I haven't read anything in volume 3 yet. I guess
it's not out. I haven't drawn it. I'm not even.
Okay, there's nothing on the website even yet.
There's like nothing on it. I'm almost done with the final script.
Okay.
Because as a rule, I don't start drawing until the script is done. Because if you start drawing before the script is done, you will realize, like, oh, it would be much better if I made this small change, except that then I would have to change it in the 20 pages that I've already drawn.
It's a gamble. Coming up, going to school for comics art, what led to the creation of a book for sad pets, how she got into making comics, and more. First, thanks to all our supporters at patreon.com/deconcomics, more classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics have been unlocked, all the way back to episode 46, and I'm releasing them at the rate of one per week in reverse order. This week I'll be republishing episode 84 from July 16th, 2007, in which Mulele and I discuss the announcement of DC Comics' webcomics project, Zuda Comics. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Are you Batman? Oh, you must be, because that's Robin. Hi, Robin.
Yes, Batman and Robin are here, and Tim and Paul are also here to evaluate the Batman TV show that took the nation by storm in 1966.
How in the name of purple wombats did they manage that?
To the Bat Polls podcast looks at the writing, the music, the guest stars, how the show fit into its times, and much more. Look for it wherever you get podcasts or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. Why, listening to the Bat Polls even makes Season 3 enjoyable.
Gosh, yes, Batman. When you put it that way.
Where did you go to school for art?
So I did my undergrad at University of Wisconsin Stout, and then I did my master's at MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design.
Okay. And I'm kind of curious because some comics people go to school and some don't, and I'm just curious how do you feel that it might have helped you as an artist?
So I think the being in school for art I think the structure was very helpful for me particularly. And I honestly think like the biggest thing that it gave me though was just connections to other artists. And like I kind of lucked out because Minneapolis has like this huge indie comic scene that I didn't know existed when I moved here. So I just like stumbled into it. And I'm maybe kind of biased because like the people, because like my best friends that I have are all people who I met in grad school right after I moved here. But yeah, for sure, just like, because the thing about comics too is that it's incredibly nepotistic. And so like it helps to like have friends and know people. And it's a lot easier to have friends and know people if you're living in a place where you're surrounded by other comics people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm wondering if, like at MCAD or in Wisconsin, did they give you any sort of pointers about business? I mean, I know that's a thing that a lot of artistic people don't have much ability in, myself included.
So the short answer is no.
Okay.
It's interesting because they've actually revamped the program at UW Stout since I was there, but I don't know if they're including more business stuff or not. At MCAD, apparently their undergrad does actually have like a lot of classes and things that are specifically about the business aspect, which is really cool. But I didn't do my undergrad at MCAD.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak to that. I only did the my master's there, and their master's program is interesting because you basically just show up and they're like, okay, make stuff, and then you make stuff, and then you have a master's of fine art. Also, you give them a bunch of money.
Right, yeah, that's an important step there.
Yeah.
And then I assume that they give you some feedback on the stuff you make.
There's like an art. There's basically you make your projects on you just sort of most of the time, or like the majority of the time, is you like consulting with your MFA mentor, because everybody like gets a mentor who like who is like a staff person at MCAD. And you like just like make stuff. And then there's a theory class and an art class each semester that you have to do. And they're both very annoying. Because the theory class, the program is like I would still say I had a very good experience at MCAD, but I feel like it would be better if they like separated students based on their concentration a little more, because they don't at all. And so we have this art theory class, which is has pretty much nothing to do with comics. It's like all like the European canon of art and art history, and then like it's very fine art focused, in the sort of very traditional idea of what fine art is. And then we have a critique class, but there's like no separation based on concentration. So, and I get that they kind of can't do that because there's like, sometimes there'll only be one person in a class that in like the entire class of that year that will have a particular major, because it's such a small population. But I don't know, I feel like they should maybe at least like do like visual arts versus, because you'll have like a graphic designer critiquing a performance artist, critiquing a sculptor critiquing a comic artist, and it's like eventually like stuff just sort of gets lost in translation. And sometimes it's like, and it's interesting often to get a perspective from someone who's like very outside of your normal audience, but also like sometimes you want the audience, in fact I would say most of the time you want the audience critiquing your art to be the audience that it's directed at. So like if somebody is critiquing my comics work and they have never read comics, like there's a limited there's going to already be stuff lost in translation there.
Yeah, they won't have maybe the tools to critique your storytelling in the comic or whatever. Well, I wanted to ask you about a book for sad pets.
Oh, yes.
That we did talk about in Critiquing Comics a few months ago. What inspired that book? So I wrote that book.
So it's interesting because I wrote all of the copy for it, all of the text. My final semester of grad school, and you can like see, it's interesting because there's like definitely like a turn as I like closing in on what felt like the edge of a cliff, beyond which was just a gigantic void of not being a student anymore. And like all of my art got real sad.
And sounding kind of desperate at points too. That please page.
Yeah, there's a definite an undercurrent of desperation to all of my work during that time. But like I wrote the copy for it then, and then I made an actual like comic of it, a version of the comic that I submitted to an anthology and didn't get in, and then sort of reformatted it into more of a sort of picture book format. And it was black and white at the time, and I just printed off copies of it and started selling them. And then Tom Kaczynski, who is the CEO of Uncivilized Books, came up to me at a convention that we were both at, and like picked up, like he didn't even like come over and read the book. Like someone else, a mutual acquaintance, had bought it and showed it to him. And he came up to me and was like, "This is the saddest book I've ever read." I was like, "Thank you." And then so a little bit after that, I emailed him and was like, "So I'm closing in on the end of my print run of this book. I'm considering doing another run with a publisher. I think Uncivilized would be a good fit. Would you be interested?" And then he like didn't respond for 2 weeks, it was just like silence until I eventually like saw him in person again, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we should talk about Sad Pets." And I'm like, "Cool, you could have emailed me." Yeah, but they ended up obviously taking it on because there's a new version of it now that they put out that's in color, and I did the color as well.
But besides the sort of end of grad school desperation, I mean, what caused you to do that book?
I think because I was also at that point. I was sort of going back, and so there's a couple different actually children's authors that sort of inspired Sad Pets and another book that I did around the same time. One is, I hope I'm not messing up her name. I believe it's Claire Turrell Newberry.
Okay.
And she did children's books that were basically just like life studies of her actual pets. Sort of strung together into a sort of loose narrative. And I just thought that they were really beautiful. And then I was also rereading a lot of, for some reason, Beatrix Potter stories.
Huh.
I found them really, they're so weirdly dark because all of the animals are anthropomorphized, and yet they still eat each other. So it's this weird, when you think about it, it's this weird world where your neighbor is definitely a cannibal, but also yeah. Yeah, when you think, if you if it's if these were people and not anthropomorphized animals, this would be a horror. But it sort of got me thinking about a lot about just animals and the ways people see them and the ways that we anthropomorphize them, sometimes not to their benefit. And we can sort of take them for granted and project things onto them rather than, I guess, seeing them really. I don't know, it just made me sort of think about how animals must see the world, and sort of realizing how little agency they actually have in their lives. The whole book is kind of just a plea to people to love their pets and treat them.
But I'm wondering if that, that grad school panic, I mean, it wasn't something necessarily, right? It wasn't calculated. It was really honest. And I think that actually ends up giving an honesty to the book where, everyone can, no one would think, oh, she must have been panicking because grad school is almost over. It feels, it's an honest panic. And it kind of translates into, the animals themselves, the attitude of the book.
Yeah. I would like to, I know Mullally suggested that, like, it would be, like, a good idea to, like, have, like, a portion of the book be donated to, like, an animal charity. And we did actually, like, discuss that, and it ended up not happening. But I think if it ever does get reprinted, I think I would like to, like, push for that again and try to get it to actually take off, because I feel like that does kind of give it would be, like, a good thing to do, and it would give the book kind of more of a reason to exist. Because I feel it, like, in the context of uncivilized, like, body of like, work that they publish, it, and in sort of the indie comic scene of just weird little books, Sad Pets kind of makes sense. It makes its own kind of sense. But I think in just a regular bookstore, like, I think people are going to have that kind of the reaction of, like, well, but I'm just sad now. Why did you do this? Which is kind of what I wanted. That's, like, honestly kind of, like, I also made a, like, semi-autobiographical book called, like, How to Human, which is kind of, I've made, like, several books that are all kind of the same, like, joke, I guess, of, like, it looks cute, and then you read it, and it's like, oh, I'm actually just feeling, like, genuine, overwhelming sadness now. Like, and it's not like gory or violent or anything, but you just read it, and it, like, there's a particular kind of story that I think like Eleanor Davis is, like, a master of this, where you read it and nothing like super shocking happens in the narrative, like, in the plot of it, but you finish it and, like, the implications of the story just sit in your stomach like a rock. And I kind of love those kinds of stories because I am a messed up person. And yeah, so I read How to Human on your site. I don't know, I found it kind of lighthearted. Yeah, well, that comic is almost like a Rorschach test, I feel like, for people, because it feels like half of the readers think that it's a comedy and half of them think it's a tragedy. Huh. Yeah, because, like, and I think it's partly, like, how strongly they relate to the subject matter. Kind of determines how they interpret it. Because, like, I definitely, when I was reading it, or when I was writing it, I definitely, like, thought of it as a tragedy with jokes in, kind of. And then I, actually, printed it and saw people. It's interesting because a lot of my comics are so short that that people will come up and read the entire thing in front of me, and which is bad because then often they'll read the entire book and go, "That was good," and then not buy it. But also like good. It's also fun because I get to see them react to it in real time. Mm-hmm. And I've had people like just read it and just be like, "This is too sad." Oh, like this is too real for me. Like this is like they just relate to it too much, almost. Like there's another comic that like I actually stopped. There's a story that I actually like stopped printing because it was too expensive. But like it was very much sort of along the same lines, or it was a similar thing where people either thought that it was like either thought that it was for children and that it was cute, or were very upset by it. And like at one point, like a like young woman was like reading it in front of me and like said out loud, "I don't like this." She was reading it.
I don't know. I guess I felt like, to the extent that I could identify with it, it was sort of reassuring because other people are going through similar things. Like, oh, I'm not the only one who like can't think of anything to say to people sometimes. Also, the way that this character's differentness is shown with her penchant for lying under a bed with her feet sticking out is sort of amusing to me. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how if someone is feeling a lot of pain from this kind of feeling, that it would not be such a pleasant read.
Yeah, I think it may be like a matter of perspective as well, because like the ending, really, when you think about it, is very sad. Because like she has succeeded in doing what the book told her to do, which is like successfully impersonate a like normal person. I'm making air quotes for the people listening.
Yeah, air quotes don't work very well on a podcast.
Yeah, but like she's not actually like, she doesn't actually feel connected to anyone. She's just going through the motions of like performing. She's like performing like the emotions and the actions that you're supposed to as a person, but without feeling them. And so she's really no more connected to anyone than she was at the beginning. And I think depending on where you are in your life, that can feel a lot more like a real possibility to some people than to others.
Yeah, I can see how that would be.
It kind of feel like that. Like I was just impersonating a normal person and not actually showing anyone my actual self.
Yeah, and not actually becoming a quote-unquote actual person. So what got you into doing comics?
So I actually didn't really decide to make comics until my senior year at Stout. And it was interesting because I was in the program, and then literally my senior year, they decided to add a comics major. They had like no comics classes before that. So I did get to take a comics class my senior year. And I actually felt like I didn't make like any good work in it. But like going out of college, like, I don't know, I sort of realized sort of incrementally through college, because I had been like drawing for a long time. And I sort of started to realize that like, oh, I actually am like capable of writing. Mm-hmm. And so right after I graduated from college, I like started doing my first webcomic, my first webcomic that got more than that got past the first few pages, which is called Zoe. And Zoe for me was really an exercise in like, okay, I'm not gonna like, because I definitely had a penchant for like doing sort of gimmicky things while I was in college, like weird scrolling formats and stuff, and so like I decided like, okay, I'm not gonna try to be clever with this. I'm just gonna try to be competent, and like everything. So everything about the comic was kind of made to be as efficient as possible. Like with my the art style was very simple. Like I had, I like really like streamlined my whole drawing process for it, and like I was doing this comic like through my very sad year of living with my parents, and then I continued it into like my first year of grad school, and like ended up finishing it in grad school, and it was, I feel like, and like looking back on it, that book is kind of a mess. But I do feel like I like learned a lot from making it. And like I definitely got, I like learned how to stick it out through a long project from doing Zoe. And after I finished it, I like did a bunch of short stuff, but I started sort of realizing that I like missed having like the long project that was just always kind of there, that I could always, it sort of always gave me something to work on. And so I started to sort of at the end of towards the end of grad school, I started doing Evil Witch Allie. And that kind of like filled the webcomic place in my heart. And then I just kept doing it. Probably will for like years, literally years to come.
What got you interested in comics? Like, what comics did you read growing up?
So my earliest comics that I can remember reading were actually like collections of newspaper comics that my parents had. So like I really loved like it was like Calvin and Hobbes and Far Side were the main ones.
Okay.
And I would just sit with these like giant like collections of all of them and just read through them page by page. And like, so that was, and I think I did actually like try to draw like a Calvin and Hobbes fan comic at some point when I was in grade school, but like, started drawing it and like realized, oh, I can't draw. I feel like that was kind of the thing that I think has held me back, like artistically and otherwise, the most, was being, I've always been, I think, more aware of my own incompetence than other people.
Well, I mean, nobody can put pencil to paper and immediately be Bill Watterson.
Yeah, but I think, I definitely, I remember being in high school, particularly, and, other people would, write stuff that, write fan fiction or original content or whatever that was, not good, but, they enjoyed it, and I definitely, got better through doing it, as where I would write half a page and be like, oh, this is terrible. Clearly I'm bad at this and I should never do it again. And I'm sure wasn't any worse than any of the other people around my age, but my problem was that I knew that I was bad at it. So I didn't do it because I felt bad whenever I tried, and the result was terrible. But yeah, sometimes you just have to be bad and deal with it.
Well, yeah, you got to get the bad stuff out, with any kind of art. I remember Paul McCartney talking about how George Harrison had to write his bad songs before he could get into the really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so I think the earliest stuff was definitely the newspaper comic things, and then when I started getting into middle school, I kind of I discovered manga and web comics at around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of my influence from that point on was started out, I would say, mostly manga, and then some web comics and indie comics, and then it kind of flipped over time. So now I would say most of my influences are other American and Western, mostly indie comics.
Mm-hmm.
And then also some manga. But yeah, there was a point, I would say all through, from middle school all through high school, I drew very anime manga style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, and and pretty generically as well.
Any particular favorite manga titles?
So I remember I really in middle school I really loved Magic Knight Ray Earth.
Oh, okay.
And there I remember I got the first 5 or 6 volumes of Inuyasha.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that it was ungodly long and never resolved anything, and kind of gave up on it. But yeah, there was one that I kind of want to go back and find out. I don't really want to finish it, but I kind of want to know what happened. That I think was actually a manhwa called Vampire Game.
Okay.
About a vampire who is reincarnated as a cat, and then is trying to find and kill the reincarnation of the guy who killed him. And also there's a princess, and stuff happens. And so it was a weird comic. But I remember that.
What about on the indie comic side? What were some favorites there?
So I remember I was very enamored in college with Hannah Is Not a Boy's Name.
I remember that title.
It had. I found out after the fact there was like a ton of like drama around it because the artist stopped making it and their fans like lost their shit basically. And it was very ugly. So that was unfortunate. I believe she's still making work though, which is good. And she's a really incredible artist, and also younger than me, which makes me feel very bad about myself. But yeah, like there's a lot of stuff that I enjoyed when I was younger that now I'm like, oh wait, that was actually bad. Yeah, but I also like don't want to insult anyone's work.
Okay. Yeah, I found a little bit about Hannah's Not a Boy's Name here online. I think we might have talked about it on the podcast a long time ago. What's coming up next from you?
So I'm planning to kickstart the physical version of the second volume of Allie. Hopefully fairly soon. I'm waiting until after I start posting volume 3 online because I think people will be more apt to give to a comic that is like currently updating.
Yeah.
But there's that. I also I finished a new mini comic in between sending the script to get edited and getting it back. So I have like it's really more of the picture book style, but it's very angsty. So I can actually, it's a tiny little comic. So it's a tiny little square. It's got a dead bird on it. Yeah, so it's sort of, the whole thing is basically just a monologue, sort of similar to
Sad Pets.
Sad Pets, but I think more, this is, the Sad Pets has like that kind of veneer of cuteness and comedy, and this does not. But yeah, it's very angsty. But it's basically about making the decision to like leave a toxic relationship.
I see.
So that will be around. Probably not gonna. I'll definitely like have copies at like conventions and things. I don't know if I'm going to bother to. And I'll probably have a PDF version of it available on Patreon or something. But I don't know if I'm going to bother like selling physical copies online.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you, off the top of your head, do you have any advice for other people who are trying to get into doing comics professionally?
Don't. I would say just I would just say like it's hard, and like there aren't any real comic artists. Like nobody is like a real artist. They don't exist. We're all faking it. We're all faking it. Yeah, the line between like a legitimate artist and a hobbyist is non-existent, and so don't worry about it. You are just as legitimate as everybody else. Because
So-
we're all liars and fakes.
So you mean like nobody really feels like they've made it?
Nobody feels like they've made it. It remains equally frustrating on every step of the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well,
just keep making art, and eventually they'll be like, I guess this person isn't going away.
just be persistent. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for your time today. This was good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Kristin Tipping's website is KristinTippingIllustration.com. Let us know what you think. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Tweet us at DeconComics. Like our Facebook page or join our active Facebook group. We'd also really appreciate your supporting us with a pledge on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where last weekend we published our review of Spider-Man Homecoming. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Can you think of one person you know who would enjoy what we're doing on Deconstructing Comics and Critiquing Comics? Send that person a text message right now and let them know about our show. Thanks. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Critiquing Comics will return in a few weeks. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Kumar and Emmett discuss Go Tanabe's manga adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.